Hello everyone and welcome to the Flipped collab for our A1a. This is for those who are interested in doing the folio. If you're interested in doing the evaluation of the unit plan, then you'll need to switch over to that particular flipped. So we have two flips because we have two separate assessment choices, which is wonderful because we're experimenting with cafe style learning where you get to choose which assessment you would like to complete. You only need to complete one, so one of the two you are choosing. You might like to listen to both and then decide, or you can just choose whichever one has sort of tickled your interest at the moment. So the evaluation is evaluating a lesson from a unit that's already completed. This one is writing it yourself. Which is great experience because obviously they're quite practical assessments and things that you're going to need to do yourself as a literacy teacher in the future. Please don't listen to this and think that this is all the information. As you'll be aware that all of these assignments are new to us too. I mean, this is my 7th time doing this unit, but the assessments are all different. So please bear with us. This is just supposed to be a starting point, so something for you to listen to just to get started, but there obviously could be more information coming out in the future. You know, things that we didn't think about, things you could add. Please come to the interactive collab. Just keep yourself up to date with new information coming out. You know, as new ideas might be presented. So just think of this as a starting point so that you can then form questions for the interactive collab. So let's get started. So A1a is a folio because we're going to be doing our own unit plan. The word count is 1,500 words. It is worth 30% and it is due on Monday the 10th of December, and that is week 6. So we were required to develop a 6-week unit plan for a class in the upper years of primary school, so you can actually select your own year level between 3 and 6. We had a wonderful question asked of us the other day about why all of the assessments are upper school or middle to upper school assessments. They all seem to be related to that, and the answer was because you've just come from developing literacy, which is primarily focused around early years of primary school. So when you did your evaluation of the reading and the writing, they were both early years samples. So this time it's time to get stuck into the middle and upper years, and that will give you lots of great experience to be able to use yourself in school. You'll notice here, obviously this link doesn't work in my PowerPoint presentation, but when you're in the assessment details, you can click on the unit plan template, and that takes you straight to the template that you need to use, which is so great because all you need to do pretty much is fill it in. You've got a link to the Australian curriculum there as well. Just remember that the unit plan must be an original piece of work that you have developed. So you can get ideas from other places. If you know teachers, they might be able to help you out with giving you something to source and help you to plan your own unit plan. So basically the unit plan looks like this. Thank you to the wonderful Kerry, who's our ELA, for putting some of these slides together for us. She's going to be our expert in this particular assessment. So thanks, Kerry. She's popped this in, and it says that just please note that this is a simplified version. We've just made it cut and paste a few things out of there just so that it fits on here. So please look at the original copy. Now, some of the interesting things that we were discussing ourselves as ELAs about this particular folio is that it's really important to have a think about the way the rubric is weighted, which I agree with as well. You really need to put your focus and effort into the things that are going to get you marks. As Kerry's wonderfully written in this corner for us, it's not just about us using the rubric as a marking guide. You need to be like immersing yourself within it and understanding what it is that we're going to be looking for, because that's what's going to get you over the line. So you need to think about and have a strong focus on the fact that we're making connections to pedagogical practices and connecting them to the Australian curriculum, and also thinking about assessment tasks and aligning that in the same way, which I'll give you some tips on today. We really need to make connections to diverse learners and how we're going to be including them within our lesson. I would probably recommend that we don't think too broadly. I know that sometimes when people think about diverse learners, they're thinking about kids with special needs. We're not really talking about that in this context though. Just try and think of within a mainstream classroom, we're going to have kids that are working way above level, kids that are working way below level. We're going to have kids of different cultural backgrounds. We're going to have kids of different socioeconomic status. We're going to have just, that wide range of learning styles that, we need to show that we're differentiating our practice to make sure that we're catering to all individual needs. Doesn't mean that we're talking about special needs. We're just talking about the needs of kids within any given classroom. So show that you're able to differentiate your program as any classroom teacher would. We are also using the curriculum and of course good quality references to support the claims that we're making. And there's also of course the usuals of your own literacy in terms of your grammar, spelling, and of course referencing. So the big ones to consider are the pedagogical practices in line with the curriculum in terms of practice and assessment, the diverse learning, and evaluating using good quality references. So if we keep them in mind as we're talking throughout this plan, we should be getting lots of marks towards those particular areas. All right, now I know this is quite wordy, but just bear with me because it talks about each of the different sections. So with a unit plan, we need to make sure that we're really specific about what our focus is going to be. And I can even show you an example of something that I've done in the past as well to help you. Because we need to have a focus that is maintained throughout the entire plan. And when you have that focus and you're very clear on what your focus is, you can make sure that your pedagogical practices and your assessment align with that. We wouldn't want to have a focus on, say, what could one of our topics be? Say your unit plan was going to be about questioning and clarifying. So we'd need to have an assessment that actually tests how well the students can question and clarify. We wouldn't want something that was testing, say, read and retell, which had nothing to do with questioning and clarifying, unless you could somehow change the assessment to give you some information about that. So remember that your assessment needs to inform your teaching and tell you how well the students have progressed and how much they know about what you want to know whether your unit was successful, basically. You want to know whether the kids know what you wanted them to know throughout the unit. So you have to make sure that your assessment aligns with whatever the learning focus and learning intentions was for the unit. I'm actually going to jump down to this green area, and I know it's at the bottom, only because I think it's important to understand, what the whole sort of idea of the unit is. So it says unit plan evaluation. The unit plan evaluation is the main idea in which you will meet this criteria. So remember to use the rubric descriptors for what you're going to say in this particular evaluation. So you're going to talk about how well you have met the needs of the kids in this particular area. Sorry everyone, I had a loss of connection. Here we go again. So in this unit evaluation, which I know is at the end, so which you could do at the end, but you probably want to have a think about sort of the lesson or the unit plan as a whole, because in this end section it talks about how you're actually you're outlining how the unit is going to support the literacy development of the kids in this pretend grade. So it might be a good something to think about initially, or maybe even put some dot points in this spot initially, so that you're thinking about what is a clear intention of the unit. What is it that we're focusing on? What is it that we want the kids to be able to do by the end of this unit, and how does it support their literacy development? Because at the end of the day, we want the kids to be able to move forward with their learning and to be able to learn these new skills. So you're using, giving a strong indication as to why your unit is supporting their literacy development, and you're making connections to lots of, academic resources to support your ideas there. Within the top section, you're looking at things like the sequence of lessons. So you've got your title, obviously, and your year level and class size. With the learning sequence or lesson sequence, I think a lot of people initially think that it's going to be a series of lesson plans, which it's not going to be. They're pretty much just overviews to give you an idea of what would be completed in each of the lessons. So if you were wondering, oh my gosh, it's 1,500 words, how am I going to have 6 lesson plans in there? That's not what it is. It is an actual unit plan, which is something different to a lesson plan. And I'll show you what I mean in an example that I've done at school recently. We need to make sure that our curriculum links and content descriptors link specifically to what our focus is. So you might need help with this section. I know that sometimes in the past with this subject, students have said the focus is exploring narrative text, and then they've had a AC link, and I think, oh, but that's not about that. That doesn't relate to that. So, get help, ask other people on the DB and say, I'm talking about this as my focus. Is that relevant if I choose this, this, and this? And make sure that your curriculum links are nice and well aligned to what your ideas are in terms of your lesson. So if you're going to be making a unit planner about inferring, then that's what your curriculum links need to show us, that they're specific to kids learning to infer. Same with your content descriptor codes and what the substrands are. Now there will be an example of this coming out, so you'll be able to see it sort of in action and how that will all look sort of coming together. So in the middle section, we're talking about, in this orange section here, we're talking about diverse learners and inclusive methods. So we need to be getting some ideas about what our objectives are, so that we're very clear on what we want to be able to do. So we've got background knowledge, teaching strategies, and assessment strategies are the main sections in which you'll need to address for this particular criteria. It is quite a big part of the assessment. So you're including the diversity of skills, needs, and interests in the average classroom. Consider ways in which you can build in information about planning for diversity throughout your whole lesson plan, as well as in these main sections. So that's a good tip that Kerry's given us there. So she's saying to try to keep the idea of diverse learning in your head the whole time when you're planning things particular to your lesson, to show that you can differentiate and meet the needs of kids and interests in your classroom, which is what you would need to do in a real life setting. Because they're going to be those main sections there, and that you'll need to come backing that with some research. So you might be thinking, well, what things can I have in terms of teaching strategies? What sorts of things can I have in terms of assessment strategies? Teaching strategies can be things that are quite specific to literacy. So you might have things in there like where kids make connections, or you might have things in there like shared reading or independent reading. You might have things in there that, could be things like prediction, or getting the kids to, establish their prior knowledge. They might have before reading strategies, they might have during reading strategies. So there are all sorts of teaching practice. When you think about teaching strategies and this sort of pedagogical practice, just think of it in terms of how are you going to teach? How is this information going to be delivered to the kids? What kind of strategies? How am I going to teach it? how am I going to get this message across? So I could use shared reading as a strategy. I could use guided reading as a strategy. I could use more open-ended strategies like, it was suggested in the unit materials, think, pair, share. So that's not specific, I should say, to literacy, but it is a strategy that is used to teach kids, it could be a visual thinking strategy. I know in the unit evaluation, they talk a lot about using different sort of visual learning strategies. So there can be things that are specific to English, which I would certainly include, but there can be sort of the more open-ended strategies as well that could just help you to relay the information across. Assessment's really important, as we said, because it needs to relate directly to what your learning intention is. So we need to be very mindful of that, and you need to be mindful of the fact that you have a diverse grade and that you're catering to different learning within the grade. So you want to have a range of assessment tasks. So it would be ideal to have perhaps a range of formative assessment strategies where you're having the kids perhaps evaluate their own work, or you could have kids evaluating each other's work, or you have some sort of, discussion with the teacher at different points in the unit, as well as maybe something a little bit more summative, perhaps, where the kids complete a particular task with assessment in mind. It's quite open as long as the tasks suit the intention of the unit. So if it's a writing unit and you're focusing on persuasive text, well, that's going to have different assessment strategies from a reading unit where the focus is on making connections. So you just need to choose assessment tasks that suit and meet the needs of the kids within this particular unit. And again, get ideas from the DB, ask your ELA, come to the interactive collab and ask questions, because you might need help with that. So you might think, I'm not quite sure, if this peer task that I've got them doing is any good for persuasive writing. They're going to evaluate each other's writing sample or whatever you've got them doing. Get some help if you're not sure of any of those ideas. Most people might be... I was chatting with Kerry about the word limit and how it can be a little bit tricky. So she's done an excellent job of sort of breaking it down for us in terms of how each of them could look. I guess the main part is that you're focusing most of your word count within the lesson sequence. And I'll show you how that can look in my next slide. We don't want to have too many lessons over the next 6 weeks. We recommend you thinking about your unit as in a couple of lessons per week. 1 week might have like an introductory lesson, and week 6 might have 2 different lessons in which students could present their work, for example. There's no real right or wrong on how your lesson sequence is. It's just that it's a unit of work that is commencing over the 6 weeks, and how many little lessons fit inside that is essentially up to you, just bearing in mind the word count. So remember that we need to choose the most appropriate links, which we've talked about on the other slide. As Kerry's recommended there, it's not about filling in a whole lot of content descriptors. It would be much more meaningful and make much more sense if you're choosing content descriptors that are most relevant. I know that it would, if there was 2 or 3 that were really ultra relevant to what you were talking about, and fitted in really well with what your unit focus was, that would be much more meaningful than a whole range of 6 or 7 content descriptors that were weak and didn't have much alignment with what the unit was talking about in terms of moving the kids forward with their learning on a particular thing. So they're just some rough guides that Kerry came up with in terms of how each of the sections could look. And I think she structured it really well, where she's bearing in mind the weighting of the rubric and what's important to cover. And I really liked her idea of making sure that you just keep the idea of diverse learners in your mind as you're completing the lesson sequence and how you're going to cater to different kids within your grade. Now, I know this is not the best sort of writing, and it's really tricky to see, and I can send out an example of this as a document, but I just thought, You know, I've done a lot of unit plans, and this is one I was working on at my school. So the focus for this particular lesson plan, and I know it's attached to Victorian curriculum, not AC, but this is what we mean by lessons in the sequence. So when it's not a whole complete lesson plan, as you can see, it is just like a stepping stone of what's going to be covered in each of the weeks. So I was doing a lesson plan with some teachers, and the focus was on determining importance. So at grade 3-4 level, students should be able to figure out what the main idea is of a text and understand what is used in terms of supporting detail, and being able to recognize what is important and what is irrelevant. So they understand by the end of the unit on how to determine importance within a range of different texts. So they'll be able to summarize a fiction text, summarize non-fiction text, and determine the importance of information within a text. And they are focusing on comprehension strategies that use to build literal and inferred meaning and evaluate text by drawing on knowledge of content, text structures, and language features. So in the first set of lessons, we had, I think there was probably about probably 10, 12 lessons within this sequence. But you can see that it's just purely what the lesson learning intention is. I can define determining importance. There was some sort of modeled idea to begin with. There was the lesson body structure on what's going to be covered. Now this is just a basic example, but you can see the reason I wanted to share this was just to show that when you're showing lessons in the sequence, it's not a whole lesson plan, it's just the main ideas on what things need to be covered. Now obviously if I was going to write this assignment, I would bear in mind the diverse needs and probably add that in with these ideas and to show that sort of differentiation of practice. But you can see here that it's just purely the steps on what's going to be covered in the lesson. And I've just lost my slides, there we go. So you can see things that says like discuss, that we can use determining importance, so you have a focus for your particular text. You've used the deserted island sorting cards, you display them as a group, you share with the group, and you repeat the activity with camping sorting cards. So it's just basic overview on what is going to happen that lesson. So I'm not saying that you need to set it out in this particular structure, but I just wanted to show that you're really highlighting the main things within your sequence, because you do only have 650 words. So you're just showing them in short, sharp sentences on the things that need to be covered in that lesson, catering for diverse needs. Now I feel like I've rushed through things as I always do after these collabs, so just remember that this is just a starting point. It was just an overview on what things need to be covered and what things maybe you should be focusing on and thinking about within the folio. There'll be a lot more information coming out, so please keep sort of contact with things so that you can get the up-to-date information on what's going on. Thanks for listening everyone, and I'll see you in the interactive collabs. Thanks.